Welcome to the Digital Intelligence Forensic Hardware Overview. This video is designed for our customers who might not be able to attend our Digital Forensics with Fred course, or potentially want to get a leg up prior to attending that course, or even for customers who have attended the course and just want a refresher on some of the components related to our Fred hardware equipment. Throughout the course of this video, we are going to discuss the various Fred workstations and components, as well as the devices that you'll utilize with the system. We'll talk a little about troubleshooting, technical support, and warranty throughout this entire video. So we'll start off with our Fred Forensic Workstation. Fred stands for Forensic Recovery of Evidence Device. We have several versions of our Freds available, starting with our standard desktop. So whether you are choosing the i9, Xeon, or AMD version of our workstation, this is going to be the standard build that you will receive from our customized, custom-only desktop chassis to all of the components that are included inside it. So, starting from the top of the workstation and working our way down, we have our power and reset buttons, along with a USB 3.1 hub. Now, these three USB ports you see at the very top are not write protected. They are not designed for evidence or suspect drives to be plugged into. Typically, we would utilize those for something like USB flash drives or dongles for our various software. Directly below there, however, you'll find our UltraBay 4D. That is our integrated write blocker that we're going to spend a great deal of time talking about shortly. Below that is our forensic imaging shelf. It's a pull-out shelf that once you pull it out, you're going to have a couple of fans installed into a non-slip anti-static top, allowing you to set your evidence down and keep it cool, especially for those long durations where you might be imaging larger hard drives. Below that, we're going to have our SATA-based drive bays, followed by our Blu-ray CDD DVD combo, and finally our USB-based drive bays. And we're going to talk about those individually to ensure that we know what the difference is between them and the advantages and disadvantages of using those devices. Inside our Fred, of course, we have some storage drives mounted directly to the motherboard. We have a 500 gig NVMe PCI-based operating system drive. We have two additional 1 terabyte NVMe drives. Typically, you'd use those for things like your case folder or your database or cache location that your forensic tool would utilize, maybe a temp location, hash libraries, backups, whatever your needs are for your particular tools. Installed in one of the hot swap bays is a 4 terabyte mechanical drive, which we would typically designate for evidence storage, your forensic images, phone dumps, along those lines. Each of the motherboards contains onboard network. The i9 version of our Fred contains a 2.5 gig network card, and our Xeon and AMD versions have 10 gig onboard network available. So looking a little closer, right, we can see that there are other options available. You may have a Fred 1R or 2R. We make some small modifications to the system to implement RAID devices. The RAIDs, of course, are allowing you to have additional storage with redundancy and potentially even speed increases. So if a Fred 1R is what you've got, then you're going to have those 5 drive bays on the very lower portion of the Fred. Those blue trays are going to have your drives installed in them. They are going to be linked and working together in what we call a RAID 5, meaning that one of the drives, in essence, is being used for redundancy or protection. So if you have the standard 4 terabyte drives, you have roughly 20 terabytes of total storage. However, you technically are only going to get about 16 terabytes of usable storage. And the reason for that is simply because of the protection that the RAID 5 offers. So in our desktop workstations, we use a RAID 5, meaning one drive in the RAID is used to protect the data. In our servers, we typically use a RAID 6, so there is 2 drives of fault tolerance. Now, of course, you can modify this, so after you receive your FRED, if you want to change the configuration, change the RAID striping, you are welcome to do that. There are instructions on our website as well. Of course, our tech support team can offer assistance with that. We would normally recommend on a single RAID system that the RAID is utilized to store your evidence. Right, it's going to be the best location for long-term storage of your evidence because of course, capacity, performance, and finally redundancy. Unfortunately, if you were to lose your evidence, the image files or phone dumps that you'd have to go back to the original evidence potentially to make those dumps again or duplicates again, and that might be a challenge for you. If you have a FRED 2R system, again, you can utilize all of the RAID for evidence. Right? However, you probably find if you utilize one RAID for evidence and the other for maybe your case folder or your databases that your forensic tools utilize, you're going to get fantastic performance that way. That's one of the tricks when installing forensic software and configuration. It doesn't matter if you have the best processor and the most amount of RAM and a killer video card and super fast drives. If you don't install your software correctly and utilize all of your I/O input-output locations to balance the reads and the writes of your software, right, you may not get the best performance possible. And of course, our tech support and training teams are happy to offer any recommendations on how to best configure your FRED for the particular software that you're using. Looking under the hood, as I mentioned, we have 3 different versions of motherboard and processor combos we can use in our desktop FREDs. The 790 chipset on the i9 side, the 790 chipset for the Xeon, so those are our Intel-based systems, and of course the AMD option as well. Within those, you may have options for processors that you are looking at or maybe you have modified. Right, so these are the standards. With the single Xeon and AMD options, we can upgrade those to 28 core and 56 core and 60 core processors, and those might be something that you need, right? Make sure that you know what your forensic software can utilize, know the ramifications of increasing the number of cores, which is typically going to have an impact on the clock speed of your processors, right? So it's not just a matter of having the biggest and the best and the most expensive, it's a matter of utilizing the resources available as best you can. So make sure you know what your forensic tools can need and can utilize, especially if you're contemplating upgrading your processors or your RAM or any of your hardware components down the road. All of our desktop workstations come with 128 gigs of RAM. The i9 can be upgraded to 192 gigs. Your Xeon and AMD well beyond that, upwards to 1 and 2 terabytes of RAM. But just because you can do those upgrades doesn't mean there's a return on that investment. So be mindful, once again, any upgrades you're thinking about doing, make sure that your forensic tools will either utilize them now or you're confident that they will be utilized in the future so that you're not spending money on upgrades you don't need. All of our forensic workstations typically will come with some type of gaming video card. And that's usually to make sure that we're not utilizing any of the onboard system RAM for video. Right? It also allows for dual and triple monitor support. Oftentimes, you'll find that when you're utilizing forensic software, having multiple screens can make your life a little bit easier. It may also be that the video card may assist in password cracking or processing of your evidence. Once again, make sure your forensic software can actually take advantage of the features of the GPUs on video cards. You also should also pay attention to what potential limitations you have by choosing certain upgrades. For example, if you're utilizing the 4070 Ti, 4080, or 4090 video cards on the motherboard, there is a limited amount of space and PCI slots. Unfortunately, those video cards are extremely large, and while they may only need one PCI slot to plug in, they tend to cover multiple PCI slots because they are so large when they are installed. So it may very well be it limits your ability to use empty PCI slots just simply because of space. For the drive bays in our system, we have two very similar looking drive bays. Functionality wise, they are very similar. The outer housing of both the SATA drive bay, located at the top of this picture, and the hot swap drive bay, located at the bottom of this picture, are designed very similarly. So the outer bay and the inner drive tray, very, very similar. The inner drive tray, which is the thing that slides out that holds the drive, can be moved interchangeably between either of the two bays themselves. As you can see on the far right-hand side, there's a toggle switch that goes left and right that locks the drive bay in place and turns the power on. Right, so functionality is very, very similar. So both will support any number of different SATA drives using different adapters that you may need. If you're using an M SATA or an M.2, not a problem. They can fit inside the drive trays themselves. The toggle switch that moves left and right, of course, locks it in place and turns the power on. The lower left blue light indicates that the toggle is in the on position and the power for that drive bay is on. The lower right light typically indicates that there is a drive in the drive bay. In fact, if you look in the upper bay, you can see that that drive tray is empty, and the lower drive tray has a drive in it. You can see the sticker that's on the drive itself. So that's going to indicate to us the status of that drive tray if something is inside it. Now, the big difference between these two is how they connect to the motherboard. So the outside, right, the way they're plugged in is identical. The way they are connected to the motherboard inside the FRED is the difference. The top bay is connected to the motherboard with a SATA cable directly, whereas the lower device has a bridge on it that allows it to connect to the motherboard using USB. You're going to get similar functionality and performance out of the two of these. The big difference between the two is the USB-based drive bay allows us the ability to enable and disable write protection. So that's what that extra button is above the power toggle. That smaller button with the smaller red light, right, that is the read-only or read-write option. So when the toggle is in the right position, as it is in this picture, whatever's in that drive bay is write protected and cannot be edited or altered, whether by the user, by Windows, by your forensic software, or any software. Right? If you toggle that to the left, it now becomes read-write, behaves as a normal drive tray. So we like this function so that if your write blocker is busy and full of evidence already, you can utilize your hot swap bays as additional storage locations for evidence and write protect them. Okay. Outside of that, their functionality is very similar. They're both going to supply you with the ability to plug and unplug drives without having to turn the FRED power off. So that's the advantage of these drive bays. You don't actually have to shut down the system to be able to swap out the drives in here. Just simply toggle the button left and right, and that will give you the ability to pull the drive trays out and do that on the fly. So the big difference, of course, is the write protection capability. Please pay attention and make sure that the write protect switch is on when you want it on, ideally with a subject or suspect drive. Right? But if you're using it to store data, store evidence, or support your forensic software, ensure that that toggle is in the left position and the write protection switch is off. This is the UltraBay 4D write blocker that is installed into all of our full-size forensic workstations. We have a different version that is in our microfred, our smaller desktop version, and then of course we have a portable version of this device as well. The big difference between the full-size 4D version that you're seeing and the portable or smaller version in the microfred is it does not have, those do not have the touchscreen display that you can see here, right? And it does not have the ability to temporarily turn off write protection using the write enabled button. So this is a unique feature that is available only in the UltraBay 4D. This unit is only available installed into a FRED workstation. As you can see, it supports multiple drive types from IDE to SATA, SAS, FireWire, USB, and of course PCI NVMe type drives. We are going to utilize the lights on the front of this device to kind of help us troubleshoot if for some reason we're having a problem getting everything to work as we'd like. So the first thing I want to show you here is this is what it looks like when everything is working as expected. As you can see, the imaging shelf is fully retracted. It has a piece of evidence or a drive sitting on top of it. The fans are running, keeping it cool. The drive cables are connected, and the power of the Ultra Bay is on. So standard rule of thumb is you want the Ultra Bay power to be off, not the Fred itself, just the power of the Ultra Bay. Of course, there's a power button in the top left corner. You will connect all the cables of the drive that you will need to either power and or get data to that drive. Some require both power and data, as the SATA drive here does. Some will only require a single cable, like your PCI-based devices and your USB flash drives and those kinds of things. Once you've got it connected properly, you can, of course, turn the power of the Ultra Bay on. Initially, the write protect light, that is the green light in the bottom left-hand corner that looks like a little lock, that's going to come on right away to let you know that the drive is write protected. That is the default every single time you turn it on. In addition, the power light will come on, and then a host and device detect light will also come on. Finally, of course, the LCD display is going to give us some technical information about what's it's seeing that's connected to it. So this is what it should look like when you fire up a device. And of course, if we had Windows open at this point, you'd be able to see it in Disk Manager and potentially even Windows Explorer. It would depend on what file system and data is on the drive itself. Looking back at the write blocker, once again, we can see where the write protect light would be. Obviously, everything is off at this point. Next to that write protect light, there is an unlocked lock that is only obviously on when the write enable feature is utilized. We'll talk about that shortly. You can see the power, host, and device detect lights along with the activity light. The activity light, of course, is going to flash when you are reading data and utilizing the drive itself. The power light is going to come on immediately with the write protect light when you power on the Ultra Bay. Right, so if you power on the Ultra Bay and the power light does not come on, right, typically there is an issue, of course, with power. It may be that the cables are disconnected in the back, potentially due to shipping or moving the system around. On the back of the Ultra Bay, right, in the back of the Ultra Bay, once you open up the Fred and look inside, you'll see that there are two separate power leads from the power supply of the system to this. The Ultra Bay requires two power connections. Number one, because it needs power to power the device itself and act as a write blocker. And number two, to power whatever you plug into it, whatever hard drives you might connect. If one of the power connectors gets loose or disconnected, the power light will likely flash. So a flashing power light indicates there's not typically enough power. So maybe there's a problem with one of the power cables, or there is an issue with the connectors themselves. Now, if the host light doesn't come on, or the device light doesn't come on, we have to take a look at what's going on with either the write blocker, the device you're plugging into it, or the operating system. The host light specifically tells you if the write blocker is successfully communicating with the host operating system. In the Fred case, of course, that's Windows. The device light indicates whether or not the write blocker is successfully communicating with whatever is plugged into the write blocker itself. So, if you were to turn your Fred on right now and you had nothing connected into the write blocker and you turned the write blocker on, the power and write block light would come on right away. Then a few seconds, the host light would come on, because regardless that there's nothing plugged into the write blocker, it will still communicate with the host operating system. So, if the host light doesn't come on, or the device detect light doesn't come on, we have to figure out now where the issue is. Starting with the host light. Now, with either of those, host or device, the first recommendation is typically just to turn the write blocker off and turn it right back on. More often than not, that will fix the problem of the light not coming on. Usually it's just a signal issue, and it doesn't recognize when something is turned on or plugged in. So first recommendation, just simply turn off the write blocker, not the Fred, just the write blocker, turn it back on, and that will likely fix your communication issue. If it doesn't, it could be an issue with either the operating system built into your write blocker, or the Windows operating system itself, where there's a communication loss or something needs to be reset. Now, to reset the Windows operating system, you can simply just restart Windows. To reset the operating system inside the right blocker, however, you actually have to lose power to the device. So unfortunately, just turning the power off of the right blocker doesn't do it, and rebooting Windows won't do it because it actually won't lose power. So if you're having an issue with either the host light or the device light not coming on, recommendation would be to close everything, save everything, and shut your Fred down just for one moment and turn it right back on. That will allow both the Windows operating system and the right blocker to both reboot and start fresh. That will almost always fix the problem with those lights not coming on when the issue is with the operating systems. So the Ultra Bay itself, as with all of our right blockers and duplicators, do have, in essence, an operating system inside. Those operating systems also need to be updated from time to time. So if the host light does not come on after a cycle of the power of the right blocker and a power off and power on of Windows, it's possible that the cable that connects the right blocker to the motherboard is disconnected or loose. So leave that to be the last thing you check, however. It's more than likely it's just a simple fix with a power cycle. Now, with a device detect light, it is possible that the issue will lie between the right blocker and the evidence that's keeping that light from coming on. If, for example, you accidentally plug a SAS hard drive into the SATA port, or maybe a PCI M.2 drive into the SATA port, or vice versa, or potentially have a jumper setting that isn't set properly, potentially a defective power cable or data cable plugged into the front of your right blocker. Any one of those could cause the Ultra Bay device detect light not to come on. That's a little trickier to troubleshoot because you kind of have to start with one thing at a time. First, of course, check and make sure you're plugging everything in correctly. Everything is plugged in nice and tight. Make sure that you are using the right adapters and the right cables into the right locations. Making sure if there's any settings or preferences that need to be set on the hardware itself, that is done properly. You can refer to your user manual with some additional information about cables and jumpers and adapters in addition to this presentation. So, if you have tested all of those things and you cannot get your right blocker to work effectively, the last thing you'll want to do before you contact tech support is make sure you have the latest version of the firmware, or in essence operating system, on the right blocker. So our devices are Tableau branded devices. They're our partner that provides the majority of our right blockers and duplicators, and they have their own update firmware software that allows you to update any and all of those devices. You can download that from the Open Text website. That is the parent company of Tableau, and they have the latest firmware always posted on their website. You create a free account and download it from there. If you're having trouble finding it, of course, our tech support folks can point you in the right direction. You'll usually want to check once a month or at least once a quarter to see if there's a new version of the firmware available. It's a very simple process to install, and it is free. Lifetime updates for your devices. Usually takes anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, give or take. And there's usually somewhere between 3 and 4 firmware update releases every year to provide additional functionality, better performance, and support for newer devices that hit the market. So, the additional feature that is built into the Ultra Bay 4D is the ability to temporarily remove write protection. Right? So, if I have a device that's connected, and once again, this is what it looks like when everything is working the way it's supposed to be, right? We have a USB flash that's plugged into the USB port, the right block light is on, the power light's on, host, device, everything is working as expected. The touchscreen display is telling me the brand and model and some technical information about the device. If for some reason, however, I wanted to write to this device, I wanted to wipe it or format it or whatever, I would need to temporarily remove write protection. So exclusively in the UltraBay 4D, there is a button that's built in called Write Enabled in the top right corner. You can sort of see it in this picture. When you press that button, now you can see it better, it's going to ask, hey, are you sure you want to switch this into read-write mode? Now again, this is not a permanent switch, it's just temporary for this power cycle. The very next time you turn the power of the UltraBay off and turn it back on, it immediately goes back into read-only mode once again. So if you were to hit yes here, then the screen would change yellow and it would tell you that it is now no longer write protected. You can see that both with the yellow warning screen and the lock changing to the read-write version. So again, this is a temporary change. Right? So the first thing you do is you plug in the device as you would normally, turn it on so it's write protected, then ask the write blocker to change into read-write mode temporarily. When we turn the power of the UltraBay off and back on, it will go back into read-only mode, so you don't have to remember to do that. All right, so this is a feature of the UltraBay 4D. It is not supported by any of our other write blockers. All right. Now, if you happen to have any of our other devices, the UltraBay Portable perhaps, or the UltraBay 4 inside of another workstation, or any of the UltraBlock write blockers, you'll notice that they all have similar lights and troubleshooting methodology. All right, so everything here is exactly the same. We've got a power light here. Now with the USB bridge specifically, there is a small LCD display. It doesn't allow you to turn off write protection. It just gives you some technical information. It'll cycle through that, tell you what the serial number of the device is, that kind of thing. Right? This obviously, our portable devices have to be plugged into the wall to provide power, and then you'll use the provided USB cable to connect to whatever workstation you want to be able to preview or see the data from that device. As you can see in this particular picture, the host light is not on, which indicates while there is a USB cable plugged into the write blocker, that write blocker must not be plugged into a Windows operating system, hence the only real explanation as to why the host light is probably not on. So the firmware software that I mentioned earlier, it's one piece of software that you would use to update all of your devices. Every brand, every version, every model of Tableau Write Blocker, one piece of software will allow you to do that with relative ease. You should also have received a forensic card reader. Similar concept. It is a write blocker, so you don't have to plug this into the UltraBay. This is a write blocker itself. It's got a USB 3 cable hiding underneath here. You can just pop it out and then plug it into any computer you like. There is a read-only, read-write switch, right? So obviously this write blocker is designed for multimedia cards like your SDs and micro SDs, etc. There is a switch on here where you can see on the right-hand side RO/RW, read-only, read-write. Now that is a change, right? This is not a temporary switch, this is a permanent switch. So if you flip that to the RW side, the read-write side, this write blocker then becomes just a card reader. You have to remember to flip the switch back. It does not do that automatically when you're done using it. Right? So we do have a feature built into our card reader that you can turn off write protection, but you do need to remember to turn it back on. Unlike the UltraBay 4D, that it automatically resets after a power cycle, this one does not do it. It's a manual button. So looking at some of the other workstations we offer, the Fred L, for example, is our forensic laptop. Right? Comes with a set of write blockers or an UltraBay Portable. You can typically choose. You may have chosen one or the other. The laptop itself, it's got a very powerful motherboard and processor and a good chunk of RAM in it. It is not just for forensic triage and duplication. It can absolutely be used for full forensic processing. In fact, it has a very similar processor to the full-size desktop. Right, so very powerful. It's not going to run on battery for as long as potentially your personal laptop will, because it is so powerful. The motherboard, the processor, the RAM, and the video card. As you can see, a very high-end video card installed into our forensic laptop. Right, just like the desktop, it's got a 500 gig NVMe drive for the OS, 2 additional 1 terabyte NVMe drives mounted inside the chassis on the motherboard. It also comes with an external drive with a 4 terabyte drive we'll mention in just a moment. Right, lots of bells and whistles in terms of the features you'd expect on a laptop, from expansion port capabilities. It's got a display port so you can plug in an extra monitor, the Wi-Fi, everything you would expect from a laptop, all those features. On the forensic side, of course, it's included a set of write blockers. By default, it's going to come up with our IDE SATA combo, as well as a PCI NVMe-based write blocker and our USB 3 write blocker. There is an option to add a SAS and or FireWire if you think that you need those, but by default, these are the 3 that are included, along with, of course, the forensic card reader. If you chose the option for the Ultra Bay Portable, this would be the system you'd have here, right? So very much like the Ultra Bay 4D in the desktop Fred, just simply in an external chassis, plugs into a wall, and of course plugs into the system with a USB 3 cable. All the same connections, it just doesn't have the ability to turn off write protection. That's the big difference between them. You may have also upgraded your Fred L to change the write block kit to include either the TX1 duplicator or the TD4 imager, right? So just an expanded version of the Pelican case, just giving you more options, right? We'll talk about those devices in just a moment. And as I mentioned, each Fred L system comes with an external drive bay with a 4 terabyte drive installed in it. So this is basically a USB portable hard drive, but it's almost identical to the hot swap bay that's built into the Fred. So the drive tray is removable and can be moved out of this and plugged directly into the Fred and vice versa. It also has a read-only read-write switch. So it's a USB-based hot swap bay, which allows you to turn it into a write blocker. It behaves exactly the same as the hot swap bay that's in the desktop Fred. So if you were to say put your triage software on here and take it out in the field, and then you were to capture a memory dump or a forensic image or capture data of whatever, and then bring it back to the office, you can simply pull out the drive tray, slide it right into your Fred and flip the switch, and you're off and running and analyzing and viewing that data. So a very versatile device, comes with all our Fred L units. Of course, you can also purchase it separately. All right, and then finally is the Viper kit, which is basically our portable forensic lab in a box. So it's our Fred L with the write blockers, the TX1 duplicator, power supplies, external or additional hard drives for storage. It's got your tool kit in it, your power strip, your universal whatever. So it's designed to be a forensic lab in the box, can be used anywhere in the world. The box itself meets all airline regulations, so you can just take the laptop out, throw it in a backpack, take it on the plane with you, and then check the rest of it until you get to your destination. Now, if you do happen to have one of the duplicator or imagers, right, spend a couple minutes here just chatting about those, the TD4 duplicator, it's designed to eliminate the need for a computer, right? So you don't have to plug this into a Windows machine. It's a standalone device. You plug the suspect or subject drive on one side. You plug your drives on the other side. Use the giant touchscreen display to tell it to either make a forensic copy or to clone or do logical imaging. Just copy certain files and folders over. You can also use it for drive wiping and restoring forensic images and a variety of things. It's got all the same inputs you'd find on your forensic write blocker, so your ID, SATA, SAS, everything like that. And then you have the ability to image to multiple destinations. So one source drive up to 5 different destinations. If you want to image multiple devices at the same time, well, there's your TX1 imager. So it's the bigger brother, so to speak, of the TD4. So up to 4 different inputs going to 4 different outputs at any given time. So you can image 4 different drives at once if you'd like. Also has a 10 gig network card in it, so you can image directly to a forensic network, a FredC, or a NAS of some sort. So both have lots of versatility. The main goal, of course, is to eliminate the need to utilize an actual computer to make the forensic copy, freeing up that forensic machine for analysis, for processing, for review, report writing, etc. We have a lot of good videos on our website on how to utilize these, how to connect them to a network, how to do the firmware updates on them. So there's a lot of good resources in our video library on our website. So if you have any desire to view those, you can obviously do that, in addition to asking tech support for any questions supporting how to use them. The MicroFred, right? The MicroFred is a smaller version of our desktop Fred. So it's a nice balance between cost and functionality and features. So we've got, as you can see, a couple of hot swap bays, though the USB based ones, versus the 4 bays below there. Those are all SATA bays. So similar to the full-size version, but they're designed specifically for the 2.5-inch drive, just trying to utilize the space as best we can. There's an Ultra Bay 4. So just like the Ultra Bay 4D in terms of functionality and lights and troubleshooting. Again, the only feature it doesn't have is the read-only, read-write toggle option. Very similar motherboard that's in our desktop Fred, just a smaller version of it to fit in this smaller case. So not the only real drawback, of course, is the expansion capabilities, right? So same processor, so identical processor to the full-size Fred. Because it's limited space, there's not as many memory slots, so you have 64 gigs of RAM by default. You can upgrade that to 96 gigs. Again, 500 gig NVMe operating system drive, a couple of 1 terabyte drives for things like cases, your temp locations, that kind of thing, and of course a 4 terabyte drive in the hot swap bay for your evidence, phone dumps, etc. So there's actually a total of 8 drive positions, so 2 NVMe slots on the motherboard, as well as the 4 2.5-inch SATA, and finally the 2 full-size 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch USB 3 hot swap. So plenty of storage, lots of I/O. Again, the only real drawback is because it's designed to be more compact and more cost-effective, the expansion capabilities aren't there. For example, there's no ability to put a video card in this, so you won't be able to add a video card just because there's no space to be able to do it. And then last but not least, as far as workstations, is our Fred Senior. The Fred Senior is basically the Xeon version of our desktop, right? The Xeon version of our traditional desktop, only in a double wide case, giving us the option to add all of this RAID storage. So the Fred Senior is for somebody who wants a full-on processing workstation, but also potentially wants maybe a centralized storage for their evidence. Right? So it's not a forensic server, but for all intents and purposes, you can use it that way. Even if you just connect it to a small private network and turn on Windows file sharing, you could certainly use it for that purpose. Or use the hot swap bays and migrate data over here. All right, so 3 different RAIDs, right? So 3 different RAIDs. If you upgrade those RAIDs to 20 terabyte drives, give or take, you can have upwards of 300 terabytes of storage inside that single desk chassis, with, of course, all the same power of either our Xeon workstation or our AMD. You do have the option to change that to an AMD if you prefer. And all the same options that you have with that Fred workstation. So it's just basically a double wide chassis with the RAID options to give you tons of storage capability, whether it's for long-term storage or you have just large case data. I'll mention the Fred C, which is our forensic network, right? So our forensic data center. We actually have 2 versions of it, a full-size version for a larger lab and a smaller version potentially for a smaller lab. But it's a air-gapped closed forensic network designed obviously for lots of centralized storage, fast data transfer rates. It includes on-site installation and training. This is the full-size version, because you can see from working your way down from the 10 gig switch to the tape archiving system, expandable storage, tons and tons of storage capabilities. You can add multiple racks, get upwards of 10 petabytes of storage. And then forensic workstations can be rack mounted in here as well. And of course, a UPS battery backup system. We also have a smaller version for labs that aren't quite as large, right, or maybe different budget. This doesn't require any special power. You can simply plug it into any outlet. Can't expand it quite as much, but it can still provide you upwards of somewhere around 600 terabytes, give or take, by expanding and adding an additional RAID storage module. Still a 10 gig network, still super fast data transfer rates, easy to manage, centralized storage. Right, so obviously the design is everything gets plugged into this. The server itself, Typically, you would not plug into the internet. Your individual workstations you can for things like Windows updates, software installation and updates, and the features of your forensic software like geolocation, data mapping, those kinds of things. But the Fred C itself, the server itself, does not need to be on the internet, and that's primarily because it doesn't require any updates outside of what we would provide you. It's got a dongle sharing system, so instead of plugging your licenses, your dongles into each of the individual workstations and constantly having to move them from machine to machine, you can plug them all into the central hub into the server, and then you can use a piece of software that gets installed on the workstation to check out the dongle electronically like you would a book from the library. Very simple to use, easy to manage, and then you can maintain security and maintenance of your dongles very easily. You can have as many rack-mounted workstations as you'd like. So if you want to use RDP and remote through them from the office into other workstations, so if you have a lot of limited space and you want to be able to have multiple workstations, but you just don't have the space on your desks to be able to do that, rack-mounted systems are really good options there. You can have the same versions of the Fred with RAIDs, without RAIDs, whatever you prefer. We also have options for GPU password cracking and processing units, virtual machine servers, so they're pretty versatile to allow you to have the features that you need. Right, so it's a Linux-based operating system, although I know people get intimidated by Linux. It is very user-friendly. We have built it and designed it for people who are not Linux users. Everything is managed from the Windows side. Limited maintenance and operating system patches. We will provide you any and all of those updates that you need, along with the lifetime tech support that comes with this unit. Okay. And the last few things I want to mention here, of course, is we are an OEM manufacturer, so all of our Freds are shipping with Windows 11. On the recovery disk that we provide, we also have a baseline image of a Linux distribution. Some of our customers would like to have Linux on their machine, so you certainly can do that as well. The boot disk that comes with your Fred, right? It's a bootable Windows environment, so you pop in the disk, you boot to it, right? And then it gives you the option to restore the baseline images that come with your system. So the Windows image that comes with your Fred from day one, as well as a baseline Linux distribution, all the drivers and everything installed and ready to go. So you would probably only ever need the Windows baseline if you're doing some troubleshooting or you just wanted to reset your machine to day one and start fresh. Whereas you can also use that boot disk to create periodic and regular backups of your workstation going forward. So we provide you with a copy of a software called Ghost that we use to make those backups. It's efficient, it's user-friendly. There are step-by-step instructions on how to do that in your Fred manual that should have come with your machine, as well as the electronic version that's sitting on your desktop, a PDF version that's on your desktop. You can also find it on our website under the documentation section of our support section. Right? If you have any problems going through the steps of creating a backup and or restoring a backup, please feel free to reach out to our tech support team. They are happy to help you do that. Your Freds all come with 3-year warranties, so you've got that coverage for a minimum of 3 years, but lifetime technical support, which you can receive via phone, email, or our online ticketing system. I normally would recommend utilizing the online ticketing system for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's a great way to make sure that any and all issues you might have are documented, so our system will keep those records for a long period of time. But more importantly, when you create a ticket, it allows multiple members of the DI tech support team to see that ticket, and then the right people can kind of access and answer those questions easily. It's very easy for us then to collaborate here in the office of trying to determine options or troubleshooting solutions. The online ticketing system, as you can imagine, of course, is free. You can create as many free accounts as you want, and then when you create a ticket, you can direct it to the right department. So if you have a question about training classes, if you have a question for the sales team, if you have a question for tech support specifically, you can gear those to the right locations, and the right people will be able to get to them and respond. Hopefully you will find this to be helpful or a nice refresher on certain components that you need to discuss. Any questions, comments, or concerns, you are welcome to reach out to Digital Intelligence and our tech supports and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.